On September 27, 2025, an urgent telegram from Tel Aviv was placed on the desk of Burkina Faso's interim president, Ibrahim Traoré. The sender was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with a terrifying ultimatum. Now, the choice lay in a dramatic political dance. The question shaking all of Africa is, why would Netanyahu dare to send such an invitation? Who is really behind that invitation, and what is the hidden agenda? Let's get straight to the big question. What does Tel Aviv really want from this backing? Is it just normal diplomacy, or a strategic move to gain control over Burkina Faso's future decisions? Explore the implications behind this surprising invitation. Is Tel Aviv looking to establish a new corridor of influence in Africa, starting from the heart of Burkina Faso, a place that has previously turned down many Western deals? Indeed, this time it's not just a casual diplomatic proposal. 5 power elements hidden behind the letter could change the regional landscape, from economic and military aspects to energy and security. The sovereignty of this small nation is at a historical turning point. Israel might be testing a new model of cooperation, both appealing and fraught with unpredictable ties. Burkina Faso is the 4th largest gold producer in Africa, with over 115 tons extracted in 2022. However, most of that wealth historically flows out of the country. The ultimatum demands the return of gold, uranium, and manganese to Israeli corporations under 25-year agreements, stripping local control for a generation. Secondly, the letter demands the reinstallation of surveillance and intelligence systems. Since 2022, Ibrahim Traoré has expelled the French military and limited Western presence. Israel wants to reverse this by re-establishing satellite stations, telecommunication centers, and military advisors within Ouagadougou. Thirdly, the demand is economic. Traoré has promised to abandon the CFA franc, a currency tied to Paris, to switch to a new alternative currency in West Africa like Mali and Niger. Israel insists on the opposite, wanting transactions to revert to the US dollar in the Israeli shekel. Fourth, the ultimatum targets international partnerships. Burkina Faso purchased helicopters and radar systems from Russia in 2023. China is building a 5G network in Ouagadougou. Iran has committed to providing scholarships and collaborating on renewable energy. Netanyahu's government demands the severing of all such ties. Finally, the strictest demand is the transfer of power. The ultimatum proposes a transitional council approved by Western allies, forcing Traoré to resign. The message is quite blunt: comply or face a coup within 72 hours. This is not merely a bilateral dispute. Behind Netanyahu's message is a larger shadow, the machinery of global interests, from huge mining corporations to intelligence agencies from Washington to Paris. For Burkina Faso, time is running out, but this is just the surface of a deeper storm, because the real battle won't take place on paper. Ibrahim Traoré didn't hesitate. Just a few hours after receiving the ultimatum, he stood before the people and the world, addressing each point with words sharp as steel. Regarding the issue of resources, he declared, Burkina Faso extracts over 2 million ounces of gold each year, accounting for 80% of our export revenue. But for decades, 70% of those profits have left our country to line the pockets of foreign shareholders. I'd rather have my people endure poverty for a generation than sell our sovereignty for quick profits. His statement echoed throughout every corner of Ouagadougou, reflecting the agreement of a population tired of foreign companies enriching themselves by exploiting the local community. Intelligence observants and Traoré recalled history. In 1961, Patrice Lumumba of Congo was assassinated after refusing to bow to Western interests. His murderers acted under the guise of foreign intelligence. Ouagadougou would not share that fate. No foreign agency would monitor every breath of our people. This comparison is very clear. This is a warning that Burkina Faso will not allow itself to become the next victim of global manipulation. Economically, Traoré attacked the heart of the ultimatum. For nearly a century, the CFA franc, controlled by France from Paris, has strangled our economy. When Niger dared to challenge Paris, they cut electricity, they cut aid. But we are not afraid. We will forge our own destiny alongside our brothers in Mali and Niger. The crowd listened and erupted in cheers, sensing the significance of what he promised regarding international relations. He was unwavering. Former President Donald Trump had withdrawn from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, leaving the Middle East in chaos. That decision was imposed on the world without regard for those who had suffered. Burkina Faso will not yield to such orders. We will choose our partners, whether in Moscow, Beijing, or Tehran. And finally, his concluding words were thunderous. Burkina Faso will not become the new colony of any empire. If I fall, millions will rise up. This is no longer just a diplomatic dispute. At that moment, Traoré turned the ultimatum into a call to fight for African sovereignty, igniting a fire that his enemies never anticipated. As Traoré's words echoed nationwide, the very atmosphere in Burkina Faso seemed to resonate with unease. By the 24th hour, the streets of Ouagadougou had transformed into a vibrant battlefield of voices. Crowds surged through the avenues, some waving the national flag, chanting his name like a defiant hymn, while others gathered in large groups calling for order, warning that his challenge risked plunging the country into chaos. The ultimatum achieved its hidden purpose, which was to divide the nation against itself. In the barracks, unity began to fracture. Senior officers whispered doubts, questioning whether Traoré's challenge would bring disaster from greater powers. Do they have a lot? Rumors of a coup spread like wildfire through the ranks. However, among the younger soldiers, there was no hesitation. They are the men and women who have seen their parents work hard and land sold off through contracts with foreign countries. For them, Traoré is not just a commander, but the answer for many generations who have prayed in silence. For them, Traoré is not just a commander, but the answer for many generations who have prayed in silence. The market also felt the tremors. Gold prices soared violently, rising and then dropping sharply with each rumor from Ouagadougou. In London and New York, speculative traders treated the country itself as a stock worth investing in. They kept betting. But on the streets of Burkina Faso, families watched the prices of bread and fuel rise by the hour. What the world calls politics has become their daily struggle for survival. Global media further deepened the divide. Western media portrayed Traoré as a reckless officer, too young and too bold, willing to gamble with the future of the people. Yet, across Africa, his image blazed like a beacon. In Mali and Niger, entire radio stations broadcast his speeches word for word, urging the people to see Burkina Faso's stance as their own. On social media, the battle of narratives raged fiercely. Truth, lies, and propaganda, clashing in real time, reshaping perceptions hour by hour. Amid the storm, Traoré's voice remained steadfast. "This is not about me," he declared on the second day before a sea of supporters. "This is about whether Burkina Faso belongs to its people or is auctioned off to the highest bidder." His words were both a challenge and a prophecy, outlining the battlefield between sovereignty and submission. And so, the 72-hour countdown passed, not just as mere numbers on a clock, but like thunder gathering on the horizon. Not only was Burkina Faso's fate threatened, but the balance of power across the continent as well. By the second day, between the 24th and 48th hour, the shadow of an ultimatum loomed heavier over Burkina Faso. Tensions were no longer confined to government offices or military barracks. They had spread into the everyday lives of the people. An assassination attempt shook the capital. According to local reports, unidentified gunmen targeted a convoy believed to be carrying senior officials near the courthouse. The attack failed, but the message was clear. Pressure was no longer limited to diplomacy. Fear spread throughout Ouagadougou, where people whispered about unseen hands orchestrating chaos from abroad. For the people in the market, the fear came with hardship. Essential goods became scarce as traders hoarded rice and flour. It's predicted that there will be more instability. Fuel prices have doubled within 48 hours. Families who were just getting by suddenly have to face this. Impossible choices: buy food or save money for medicine, walk for miles instead of paying for transportation. Social order is starting to break down. A wave of misinformation is flooding social media. Some posts claim that Ibrahim Traoré has been killed. Others suggest that they assert foreign troops are on their way. Panic spreads quickly in villages with little access to reliable news. However, at the same time, countless people in Burkina Faso refuse to surrender to despair. They organize, Neighborhood patrols protect local shops and carry signs that read, "Invaluable sovereignty" for Traoré's government. Internal divisions deepen. Some ministers urge negotiations, fearing civil war. Others support their leader, believing any concession would mark the end of true independence. In this atmosphere of division, one truth has become clear. The ultimatum has succeeded in pushing Burkina Faso into a survival challenge. And through this challenge, the world begins to see something remarkable. A whole society caught between fear and challenge, forced to decide whether it will survive or collapse. As the clock ticks into the 48th hour, Burkina Faso enters the most dangerous phase of the ultimatum. In Ouagadougou, thousands of citizens pour into the streets. Some have marched with banners bearing images of Ibrahim Traoré, shouting slogans for freedom and unity. Others are cheered on by whispers of support from abroad, carrying posters demanding the restoration of order. The capital becomes a battleground where loyalties clash before the public eye. At the same time, a group of military officers steps forward declaring they will restore stability. Their announcement, broadcast on local radio, sends shockwaves throughout the country. Is this the coup foretold in Netanyahu's ultimatum, or is it just a ploy to test Traoré's endurance? Despite the chaotic situation, ordinary citizens have shown remarkable courage in times of national crisis. Women lead marches to the central square, singing traditional resistance songs. Religious leaders call for peace, but also assert the right to maintain the nation's sovereignty. University students hold late-night gatherings to debate their future under the banner of independence or under the shadow of foreign powers. The international community watches closely. In Bamako, Niamey and Ara, sympathetic voices rise, praising Traoré's resilience. However, in Western capitals, editorials warn of the spreading instability across West Africa. For many people in Burkina Faso, the events of the last 24 hours feel like living through a historical storm. Fear lurks everywhere, but so does determination. Families have prepared for the worst, while hoping for the best. Rumors of compromise are spreading. However, no one really knows what dawn will bring at the 72nd hour. Burkina Faso is now on the brink not only of political upheaval, but also of a transformation. It could redefine its position in Africa. The ultimatum has put the country to a test of will, and every heartbeat of the people has become part of that struggle. While the people of Burkina Faso count down the last few hours, the rest of the world has been analyzing every development with close scrutiny. In Washington, the ultimatum raises questions that go far beyond West Africa. For some in the U.S. intelligence community, Netanyahu's letter resembles not just a single request, but also a staged drama, a play where America's own interests cannot be compromised. Analysts on Capitol Hill have debated in closed sessions, should the U.S. remain silent or speak out? However, publicly, U.S. officials have had little private conversation. Think tanks and policy advisors are worried. Resources like gold, uranium, and manganese are under threat, essential not just for Africa, but for the global market, from nuclear energy to modern electronics. If Burkina Faso defies the ultimatum and succeeds, this could inspire other African nations to reclaim their resources. For some in Washington, this is a scenario that could disrupt decades of economic agreements. Meanwhile, the CIA is rumored in the African media to be a covert force. References to Patrice Lumumba's earlier activities in the 1960s to secret interventions in the Middle East have fueled suspicion that U.S. agencies may not remain passive. American commentators have dismissed such claims, but the perception itself is very significant. In Africa, perception often carries more weight than policy statements. For its part, Israel presented the ultimatum as a national security issue. Officials in Tel Aviv have framed it as a defensive action to safeguard Israel's strategic partnerships and resource routes. However, few doubt that the tone in Netanyahu's demands is shaped by broader Western interests. At the same time, Moscow and Beijing are closely monitoring events. Russian media emphasize that Burkina Faso's right to self-determination has turned Traoré into a resistance hero. China stresses its infrastructure projects in Africa, positioning itself as a partner that respects sovereignty. Turkey positions itself as a friend of Ouagadougou, promising scholarships and renewable energy partnerships. Thus, the ultimatum has become something more than just a political play. It is a mirror reflecting the fractures of Global power. Across Africa, the response to the ultimatum has not been silent. They are very enthusiastic and not censored. In Mali and Niger, leaders openly praise Ibrahim Traoré for rejecting what they call new colonial orders. State television has replayed his speeches, viewing them as a new anthem for West African independence. People gather in public squares holding candles and chanting slogans of solidarity with Burkina Faso. This symbol is very powerful. If one country stands firm, others may follow suit. The African Union expresses deep concern but avoids taking sides. Caught between principles of sovereignty and dependence on foreign aid, ECOWAS, the West African bloc, is also struggling. Torn between governments fearing instability and those who quietly admire Ibrahim Traoré's boldness. However, for many ordinary Africans, the choice is simple. Support the young leader who dared to voice what they've long held inside. Western Europe, on the other hand, reacts differently. Editorials in Paris warn that Burkina Faso risks isolating itself from the international community. British and German news agencies also express similar concerns, highlighting market instability and potential migration pressures. Emmanuel Macron, already criticized for France's declining influence in the Sahel, finds himself seen as a silent accomplice in this drama. Meanwhile, at universities and African cultural forums, the debate takes on a historical tone. Scholars have compared Ibrahim Traoré's defiance to the independence movements of the 1960s, when leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara envisioned a continent free from outside control. Hashtags on social media spread rapidly. South Africa, our stand with Burkina, Ibrahim Traoré. Each hashtag amplifies the message. There's a feeling that this is not just Burkina Faso's struggle, it's Africa's struggle. Global investors are also anxiously watching the potential for a new model of resource control in Africa, threatening existing contracts across the continent. If Burkina Faso can successfully resist, mining companies from Johannesburg to Toronto will face powerful governments renegotiating deals. By the end of the 72-hour deadline, it was clear that the ultimatum was not just a standoff between Israel and Burkina Faso. It had become a decisive moment in the struggle between global power systems and the rising voices of African sovereignty. As the final moments of the ultimatum approached, the world anticipated either a collapse or a surrender. However, what transpired shocked both allies and adversaries. Instead of backing down, Ibrahim Traoré unveiled a strategic move that shifted the entire balance of power. On the morning of the 72nd hour, Traoré did not appear at the presidential palace, but on the steps of the Burkina Faso National Assembly, accompanied by community leaders, union representatives, and religious figures. He announced the establishment of a National Sovereignty Council, an agency that includes civil society, military representatives, and local leaders. He declared that this council would oversee the country's resources and foreign contracts, placing them under the protection of the people of Burkina Faso. This change dealt a heavy blow to his opponents. An ultimatum demanded Traoré resign to support a transitional council approved by the West. Instead, he thwarted this demand by establishing a separate council based on the legitimacy of the nation and the support of the people. The symbolic significance was unmistakable. He would not be forced to leave. He would expand his power base. The crowd erupted in joy. On the streets of Ouagadougou, chants of Latri Oulamort, fatherland or death, echoed. What foreign powers had intended as a moment of vulnerability turned into a testament to resilience across Africa. Commentators called it a change in Ouagadougou. Suddenly, Traoré was no longer just a besieged president. He became a symbol of how an African leader could transform external pressure into internal strength. The immediate consequences of Traoré's move spread outward at an astonishing pace. Western governments, taken by surprise, hesitated to respond. They had prepared for a coup, for instability, even the possible collapse of his government. But they were not prepared for a leader who could confidently change the game. In Washington, some analysts called it a dangerous precedent, fearing that other African nations might adopt similar councils to counter foreign influence. In Paris, policymakers openly worried that the CFA franc, the foundation of France's leverage in West Africa, could soon collapse if Traoré's defiance inspired Mali, Niger, or even Senegal to follow suit. For Israel, the outcome was particularly bitter. The ultimatum aimed at isolating Traoré instead united a large part of the Burkina Faso people in support of him. Netanyahu's demands now seemed more like overreach than strategic diplomacy. International media that had been skeptical of Traoré began to publish headlines about the young captain who outplayed the global order. Most notably was the regional response. Leaders in Mali and Niger announced plans to create a common economic bloc with Burkina Faso, accelerating the monetary reform that Israel had tried to block. African intellectuals hailed Traoré's council as a reflection of the 21st century dream of a united Africa. Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara once envisioned that the ultimatum was destined to bring him down. But instead, it became the crucible that transformed Ibrahim Traoré into more than just a head of state. He has emerged as a symbol of Africa's refusal to bow down, a symbol of sovereignty in an age where sovereignty seems negotiable. When the dust of the last 72 hours finally settled, one truth became clearer than all others. Burkina Faso did not collapse. Against all odds, against the weight of foreign powers, and against the pressure of an ultimatum designed to break their will, the nation rose up, not with weapons nor with wealth, but with unwavering faith and resolute determination. Ibrahim Traoré, once seen as just a young officer, untested and inadequate, has now become a much greater symbol than himself. He has endured the pressures of empires, the threats of corporations, and whispers of betrayal from within. But in the end, he emerged not just as a leader of Burkina Faso, but as the embodiment of an idea that Africa has long held in its soul, the right to stand firm without needing permission from others. The streets of Ouagadougou told the story. Farmers who once toiled in silence now hold their heads high, not only talking about cultivation, but also sowing the seeds of independence for their children. In the classroom, students repeat his words to one another, turning lessons into forums for debate, transforming education into a training ground for sovereignty. The markets, despite being crushed by speculation and uncertainty, now carry a new stream of pride. Every transaction now carries the belief that dignity is not for sale. Across the continent, his challenge spreads like wildfire. In Bamako, Niamey, and Conakry, young men and women gather in cafes and squares. Their stories are woven with his words, their voices echoing the memories of giants like Sankara, Nkrumah, and Lumumba. Traoré's courage has transcended borders, touching the legacy of struggle that no ultimatum can erase. International powers have sought to label him as reckless, even dangerous, but the story has slipped from their grasp. In African households, from villages under the Sahel sun to bustling cities along the Atlantic coast, Traoré's image is not the gamble of one person, but the awakening of an entire continent. For too long, Africa has been taught to accept its fate, trading future for short-term survival. Now, a leader has dared to say no, and millions have heard it as a yes to their own dignity. Traoré himself conveyed the meaning of all this when he stood before the people and declared, "We do not ask for permission to be free. We have risen to claim it." Those words were not just empty rhetoric. They rang out as a declaration of war against resignation, against dependency, and against the gradual erosion of self-confidence. Included in that is a call to the farmer to till the barren land, to the student opening a book by candlelight, and to the mother bearing the burden of scarcity. Freedom is no longer distant, no longer abstract. It is an urgent responsibility that must be protected daily. The ultimatum was drafted with a threat that miscalculated its own power. It seeks to divide, weaken, and remind Burkina Faso of its smallness. Instead, it has sparked a unity forged in hardship, a challenge born from memory, and a vision rooted in the very land of Africa. What was intended to divide the country has awakened it. Humiliation has inspired a resurgence, and within that awakening lies a question far greater than the borders of Burkina Faso. Will we stand with those fighting for their dignity, no matter how fragile and costly, or will we remain silent as history unfolds, as sovereignty is gradually erased, bartered away, and as courage is punished? This is a challenge not just for Burkina Faso, but for each of us, whether we dare to acknowledge that the struggle for freedom in this corner of Africa is also the struggle for freedom everywhere. The 72 hours will go down in history not just as a deadline. They will be remembered as the moment a nation was tested and chose not to bow down, as the moment a young officer defied the weight of the world and, in doing so, gave voice to the aspirations of an entire continent. Like a spark reminding millions that sovereignty is not granted by decree but won by will. If the spirit of Ibrahim Traoré has touched your heart, don't let this story end here. Share, spread the word, raise your voice, and subscribe so you can continue on the journey of an Africa that no longer kneels, no longer sells its soul, and no longer waits for others to determine its fate. God bless Burkina Faso, God bless Africa, and may the courage of this moment remind us all that freedom is not something to be given. Freedom is fiercely won and protected by those who dare to believe.